You know what? I just have to say I'm really, really delighted to have met you personally.
Yeah, well, it's great to...
Thank you, sir. This is Project Camelot, and my name is Bill Ryan, with my partner, Kerry Cassidy. And we're bookending here right between us. We've got Dr. Bill Deagle, and it's a tremendous privilege to be with you.
Yeah, thanks very much.
I just joked with Dr. Bill just now that I'm claiming a Guinness record for having listened to the Granada Forum lecture all the way through 7 times, which I had to do because there's so much data in there. And not only that, in a phone call just a few days ago, Dr. Bill told us that he'd probably only presented about 10% of the information which he has to offer. And one of the things which we hope to do in the next couple of hours is to see whether we can get on record as much of the remaining 90% as possible. And in particular, many of the people viewing this video now, and the two of us, Kerry and myself in particular, are really interested and focused on what is going to be happening in the immediate few weeks and months. And I think one of the phrases that Bill used was the calm before the storm. What's the storm?
Well, there's the best way to think is the Army War College. And if talk to people that work in the Marine Army War College and other places, what they do is they war game it out. They have people that sit around big boardroom tables, and then what they do is they put it into simulation computers. They use Simula, PL1, and other languages that were actually developed for the military, and then they put it on their own supercomputers, and then they run through a number of simulations. So every war, every conflict, every national emergency has already been scenarioed out. People don't realize just how much computing power has been put into these things for everything from ET invasions to a tsunami hitting the west coast, to the Cumbra Viejo, to a civil disruption because of an earthquake in the New Madrid Fault in the Midwest. So basically everything's been simulated. There's a number of items. Now, what I often try to do on my radio show, which is the NutriMedical Report, is on Genesis Network. And the two websites, if you want to check it out, is Nutri, N-U-T-R-I, medical.com, where I have a lot of the anti-aging, life extension, civil defense, and other information. And the other website is Clay and Iron, CLAYANDIRON.com. The network is Genesis Networks out of St. Paul, Minnesota. And their website for getting podcasts, streaming, and on-demand, which replays the shows, is GCN, George Charlie Nancy Live.com. What I try to do on my show is I realize that one of the things about having a regular radio show is you can bring in all these experts and guests, but there's several ways of approaching it. My approach has been to try that if they listen to enough shows, that people will start to see a montage of images that will change their paradigm. Mm-hmm. Because you can't change people by necessarily beating them over the head with the facts if they emotionally aren't ready for that. Yeah. And you also have to change their paradigm by what I call by the little grades that happen as they listen to more and more people, and they are willing to accept one message from one type of person or one way of doing it, or a little humor or some music. Yeah. And eventually they get to the point where they're able to then accept the intellectual truths, the spiritual truths, and so on. The two key things that I try to teach in my show are the first thing is that people don't know what they are. People really don't know what kind of a being they are. And because of that, which is in many cases kept purposely away from them, mm-hmm. they're manipulated. Mm-hmm. For example, if you didn't know you were a bird, you'd obviously not try to fly. Yep. Right?
Good analogy.
The other thing is I try to teach them is that everything that they have learned in the past has been pre-digested and presented to them. So they really don't understand the nature of the universe they live in. Yep. They don't even know what, quote, reality is. Mm.
And all this is one of the parameters in the model, presumably, that people are interacting with this stage show
Right.
with a very limited amount of information at their disposal with which to react and make appropriate judgments.
Right. So what I try to do is I try to stretch them beyond that. And one of the things that I try to do is there's no such thing as a sacred cow. Whether it's a political view, a religious view, a scientific view, it has to be, trust but verify. Ronald Reagan, before he had too many aspartame jelly beans. The idea is that eventually you'll get enough evidence and enough logical things that you have what I call the two witnesses. It has to not assault your intellect, the information, and it also has to ring with your spirit.
Good. But, a lot of people watching this now have already done that homework.
Right.
Either by listening to your shows or listening to ours, because we've been operating in exactly the same way, or both.
Right.
And there's also, would you agree that there's not a lot of time now?
No, there's not a lot of time. And there's a number of what I call spasms of events that are going to happen. And to just give you the timeline of where things are going, rather than giving you specific dates, the first thing is that people need to understand whether we elect McCain-Palin or Obama, Biden, or the Green Party with McKinney, the events are already in motion to create a regional and world economic catastrophe, and then to create regional and world banks.
So they've already got the script for the movie, but they haven't got the cast yet.
Right, and they've gone to central casting, and whoever the players are, they're in a sense going to be like riders on the wave of this.
So what's the script?
Well, the script basically is that, and I'll back up a little bit, because...
And also, a few minutes ago you mentioned modeling. It would be great to tie this back into the modeling scenario that you...
Right, they've done lots of modeling. In fact, they have one of the most advanced programs at the University of California in San Francisco, and they're tied directly to the National Reconnaissance Office. This, by the way, I do regularly on my show release classified information. And NRO has access to, the Cray 5s and Cray 4 supercomputers arrays. And so they're able to do simulation.
That's located in Denver.
Well, that's where the main node. That's where the main node is. It's actually Schriever Air Force Base, but they also have their systems elsewhere. And people need to know that the world that they believe in is a fairy tale that never existed.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
So anyway, this is at university level. They have a social modeling supercomputer program, and what they do is they try different perturbations. They'll try a little thing, put a balloon up, put a media event. And they're able to model that based on getting information back. They're able to do specific searches, which are called architectural searches, not all that indifferent from the half-past human or the Princeton University kind of eggs thing. Yep. They're actually mining the internet, they're mining phone conversations, they're mining data from people's cable boxes, which have got two ways so they can know what they're watching, and they have what's called data architecture software that can actually analyze it.
Yep.
That's a possibility that they can do that, but the most important is they just know what they're viewing. And if they know what they're viewing, what the box is turned on to, they can actually put this back into their data. And they can then say, based on area code distribution, demographics, etc., because people need to know that every phone conversation always was monitored, every fax always was monitored, and they have had supercomputers, and in 2003 they launched what's called the AI system, which is a intelligent supercomputer with the intelligence of a human being, in other words, a smart human being, but able to think 10 trillion times faster, with the access to all known knowledge and history, and a complete access to the internet and all of the communication pathways. So,
okay, with that in mind, the modeling, they are making their plan. Their agenda is going to be played out as what, the biggest surprise they can think of?
Well, no, what they do is they have a cybernetic copy of the Earth, and they can actually do models with that and try to do what's called timeline pathway analysis. And
right, but how do they choose? Do you know that?
Yeah. Part of virtual world with virtual people.
They get a virtual world. I actually took care of employees working on what's called the Sentient World Project in Denver. And it's
but I still don't understand how they're choosing their scenario. In other words, we know that the financial collapse.
Well, they can try a scenario, and they can actually try it in the cyber world, and then they can see the response based.
But have you gotten feedback from, say, secret deep lab projects saying, they've chosen this scenario?
Some things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give us some clues, Bill.
We'll give you an example. One of the first things is, by doing this modeling, it means that they don't do it in just a kind of in other words, they're not just trying it on the public. They try a different thing. For example, they had the countrywide financial collapse earlier this year, and then they had the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and they try each thing, and they try to see what kind of response they're getting from the public, and they feed back into their model. Now, when I took care of the people that were working on the Sentient World Project, they actually created a cybernetic model of the Earth that's an actual physical model in hyperspace that is down to a tolerance of about 1.5 centimeters. So all the roadways, buildings, everything, people, everybody inside that model are actually considered called nodes. That's their actual term they use for it. Besides doing the cybernetic computer modeling, they're using other technologies. Some of them are quite alien, if you want to call it.
Okay, I can believe it.
And when they're using these technologies so they can actually analyze timeline pathways, because what they're trying to do...
You're talking about Looking Glass, then.
Yeah, Looking Glass is another... Yeah, exactly. And of course, a lot of people don't understand that most of these are actually based on what's called torsional vortex imaging, which is hyperdimensional imaging. And torsional vortex imaging we've had since the 1950s, reverse engineered. Torsional vortex imaging was the top project of HARRP. It was not the bottom project, it was the top project. So torsional vortex imaging allows them to look through the Earth to see all the resources. So the primary thing was to drop a thermomagnetic mirror with aluminum and barium salts at 73...
Which is a chemtrail project.
Yeah, but it's really high, 73 to 80,000 feet. You won't see these. And when the particles are put up there, they last 2 to 3 years in space because they layer out and they get locked into that layer at the upper troposphere. And it acts as a mirror for what's called torsional vortex imaging, so they can throw a pulse and then see an echo that comes back and they can image it.
I got it.
So they can see oil resources, gold, minerals, titanium, whatever they need, and they can also see through the Earth and see underground bases, cities, facilities. So, for example, when the
including stuff that isn't even ours.
And they can also see stuff that's not ours. Exactly, see giant caves and cavern systems that go hundreds of miles through the Midwest. But they can also see things like military bases, like the Chinese nuclear and military munitions base that was struck with a tectonic weapon in Sichuan, West China. That was a specific use of tectonic technology, Now we have our version of it, and the Russians have had a new system called a supercapacitor technology. So they're able to make these very, very powerful capacitors that can generate similar things to our HARRP technology.
Okay, but where are they going with this? That's actually what we...
Yeah, where are they going with all this, just to give you an idea? The first thing is you have to look at the menu of what they have, and they try various items, try to perturbate it and then do computer modeling, and then they decide on whether they're going to proceed now or in the near future. Like a lot of people say, well, why hasn't it been another 9/11? Another, like, blowing up cities or doing other things. Because for years, they've been doing war game simulations of a 10-kiloton nuke in a number of cities. For example, this year it was in Portland Harbor, and last year it was in Charleston Harbor, where they actually did a simulation of and it was not just the U.S., it was U.S., British, and Canadian, where they're doing a joint war game simulation of this and trying to see the civil defense and the radiation plume and the movement of the public and, how to handle the bodies and all this kind of thing. So they're doing all of that. They do this on multiple levels, and they feed the data back into their supercomputers to decide what will work best. One of the things that we did back in the late 90s, I was a doctor for Rocky Mountain Occupational Medicine, and we got the contract for the hazmat teams in Colorado, for the FBI and the Center for Disease Control to do a war game simulation called Operation Top Off and Operation Dark Winter. We did a simulation at the U.S. You did a simulation at the Performing Arts Center on a, quote, simulated release, not a real release, of pneumonic plague. And we wanted to look at the kill ratio in terms of how quickly the system could be activated, the EMS system, to be able to get people and treat them and triage them and whatever. And we did a similar one down on the 17th Avenue of downtown Denver at the second floor window of an apartment, and we had we even set up a sprayer to spray out the window with a little compressed air, a little vapor stream, which was supposedly anthrax. So it would be a weaponized anthrax stream that would actually spray out that second floor window, and that anthrax stream would then, we would then have people go, we had hazmat officers and special forces, and they would go to various hospitals like St. Joe's, Presbyterian, St. Luke's, etc. And we try to see, we was recording all these data intake sheets, whether or not, number one, the emergency departments would activate the CDC, get the proper specimens, get people treated in a timely fashion so they wouldn't die. We killed everybody. Both of them. We killed everybody. So what we
Why did you kill everybody, though?
We killed everybody because the system was too inadequate. The emergency department doctors, the infectious disease, the activation of the system, the tracking back to the source of the spray would have been too long. So if there was a lethal weaponized anthrax, it only needs, let's say, 80 spores to cause a lethal infection rather than 80,000 to 100,000.
Yeah.
That we figured out from the dispersal at that level in the canyon of, say, 17th Avenue would have killed at least 4,000 to 5,000 people that were, during the middle of the day, would have been exposed.
Right.
Now, the reason why I bring out that model is they're doing this all the time with their cybernetics models because they're trying to steer society along certain timelines. Right. And they have mirror forces. All of the people in this quote, you hear the word New World Order, they're not in agreement, and there are various levels, and most of them think that they're at the top of whatever level they're at. And they're really at the bottom of another level. Okay, even the people at the top that are human.
Right.
Because the New World Order is not being run by humans.
Yes.
Okay?
Exactly.
They need to grasp this. The analogy I use in my show is, in Victorian England, they would, as part of a parlor game, they'd bring you to their gardens, and their gardener would kind of make a little maze, and then you'd go through the little maze and thought you were quite clever because you get out in a matter of moments. And then what they do is they take you to the big maze, which is done by a very clever gardener, and the only way you could get out is if you were talked out.
Okay.
Okay? If you weren't talked out, you wouldn't make it out of the maze. You'd be stuck there afternoon and would not have tea or anything, right?
Okay.
So the thing was to humiliate you to realize that there's no way you can get out of this big maze unless you changed your paradigm of how to get out of the maze.
Okay,
right?
good. Right.
And what they're doing basically is they're, in a sense, they're sheep dipping the entire society to kind of buy into the lies of what's going on. People don't know what kind of, even modern history has completely been rewritten. Everything.
But there is some waking up going on.
It's happening
anyway. Is this
anyway.
also factoring?
Yes, it is.
It's also being factored in.
Sure it is, and that's why there's been quite delays. In fact, if you look at the published documents like Global 2000 about population reduction, if you look at the planned release of things like avian flu, if you look at them planning on blowing up cities or with dirty bombs or micronukes or doing other things, they're way behind schedule.
This also means that they've also programmed in the Nutrimetrical report and the Project Camelot interviews, and they're taking all of that into account and then recalculating everything, right?
Well, they are, but the problem is there's a number of wildcards that they're not in control of.
Which are?
Well, lots of wildcards.
Okay.
The first one is there's a human one. Human beings are a polydimensional, being that far transcends what people usually think of as human. Just to give you kind of go back up in terms of little physics, our plane of existence, the energetic plane, has 5 dimensions, not 4. Okay?
Yep.
Then the spiritual plane has 7 dimensions. Some people call it astral. And then there's the 13th, which is the eternal. Okay? And everything are harmonics of that. That's why the very nature of existence itself is literally the passage of spirit through energetic planes. It creates a montage.
We'll buy all of that. And what we are here, what I see in my field of vision, is a tiny tip of a huge iceberg.
Right.
And that iceberg is a beautiful, fantastic, wonderful, eternal thing. And,
right, exactly. In other words, this moment that's existing right now as we are taping has always existed.
Yeah.
I'll buy that too.
Absolutely, time is circular. So,
Yeah.
but
Right.
but Bill, what I wanted to know is, what are you saying they're going to do with this? Because obviously, if they're behind schedule, and here we are in end of September, and we've got the American economy going in the tank,
right?
And so, what's the next step?
Well, here you got to think about what their goal is, and it's almost like a mouse that reaches certain barriers. A smart mouse, and if you put a barrier down, if the mouse can still smell the cheese, it'll get around that barrier and it'll figure out how to do it. And if it's a very intuitive mouse, it can see beyond the barrier to where the pathway is to get to the cheese. And if it's got lots of access, then it's going to do that, right?
Right.
So where I see it is this. Their goal is to have a World Bank. Their goal is to have regionalized currency zones. They published it. In fact, one of the things is you have to understand, which is really bizarre but also true, is that part of the, quote, religion, if you want to call it, or the dogma of the globalists, is to prove that they're a super class or the predator class or have the right to make these decisions, is they have to publish it, and the profane don't understand it. But it's plainly published. Like, for example, in September of 1973, the Council on Foreign Relations.
It's all in plain sight.
It's all in plain sight. In other words, if you want to have
Mountain report, for example.
right, or the 1974 document that talked about the greatest danger to the world is population growth, or the Global 2000.
Guidestones.
Exactly. It's all in plain sight, and the problem is that people will look and say, well, it can't be true because it's in plain sight. It's almost like if you want to say that it's a battleship, it's, well, it's painted pink. It can't be a battleship, and it's got plants coming off all the turrets.
Okay.
Even though it is a battleship and it's in the front yard.
What aliens, though, are running the show, in your opinion?
Well,
Or-
I'm going to get to that because I'm going to give you a little different spin. What we have to do is use a lot of discernment. There's basically two perspectives in the universe, and this is whether you're human or non-human. What we are, or any other, quote, sentient being in the universe, is a spirit being that's transcending to an energy matrix, creating a reality. Okay, in other words, we're co-creators of our own timeline and future.
Absolutely.
And if you look at people like Michio Kaku, advanced physicists and so on, they talk about the universe in terms of energy, you know, like a zero energy culture and a level 1 energy culture, a culture that is able to leap across the galaxy and is bound by time-space. But you can also use those similar principles for, you know, similar kinds of characteristics for dealing with what I call the spirituality of a sentient civilization, right?
Right.
So you need to use both the energy thing, and they are tied together.
Yep.
Because there's a lot of suppression of the technology that we already have, because spiritually we're very, what I call a zero-order culture.
Yep.
We're still in the playpen or the crib of civilization, and we've been actually quarantined for 3 shars, which is Sakurai Sitchin's passages through the galactic plane of fire, it's called. The two perspectives tie in with either being in touch with that higher self, which is the I am, the one that says, let there be light, the spirit that's in us. And it's been in all great spiritual leaders that spoke truth that they knew in their heart, whether it was Buddha or Zoroaster or whatever, all these great leaders have spoken something, and many times it's been converted or perverted or twisted, or they themselves didn't have the whole truth, they just had portions of it, so then it became a religion. Now religion is a substitute for relationship.
Yep.
And I call it real lies going on. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, atheism, all the isms in the world fall into 2 categories. Either you're here, the voice of the spirit that created you and created all that exists, the continuum, because without a single voice, there is no universe. One I voice, I call it. There is no one I voice. So therefore, it's either your will, the will of, in other words, deciding for yourself what is good or evil, or hearing the voice. In other words, you don't need to tell people what's right or wrong. If they're in contact with a higher self and with the creator that created them, they know what's right or wrong.
Okay. Now, just bring that back to where you were when you were talking about the wildcard factors of who people really are. This is my paraphrase of what you were saying there, and how there are certain things that can't be programmed into their supercomputer because actually you're talking about aspects of human beings that are eternal and magical.
Exactly, and that, you see, that point ties in with the factions, if you want to call it. You know, and you can go to all kinds of different religious books, whether it's the Hopi Indians or the Christian Bible or many other books, and they'll tell you that there's been visitations to Earth over all of the ages.
Okay, now...
And the way it ties into this is that some of these visitors have specific characteristics that are very common. For example, the Naga in the area of the Oceania, right, which are, you know, the serpent people, or the feathered serpent god, or whatever. And what you'll find, or the Dagon, you know, which is the amphibian beings that come from a world, and therefore even the hat, for example, that's on the Pope is actually a sign, is called the sign of Dagon, right, which is the fish god, or Onanes.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Okay.
But
which
right
is always
now,
in the background, in other words.
Right now, there'll be people watching this who say, right, I know I'm eternal and magical, and I'm really interested in what you're saying. So what can I do? How can I be? What action can I take to capitalize on my wild card that they may not be able to predict what I'm going to do next?
Well, yeah, what I'm trying to do is get at, you know, I hear lots of different reports that people say, I've been in touch with the Pleiadians or the Andromedans, or I've been in touch with this group or that group. People need to use extreme discernment.
Yep.
And the way I think about it is this, to say, you know, if you went to a new city, let's say you were from South Africa, and you came to New York City, and you didn't know where to go, but you went to the wrong part of the city, you might not come back out alive.
Right.
Okay? And the similar thing, you have to think of the universe that way too. There's very good places in the universe and very bad.
Yeah.
Okay? And just think of it this way. Any being that's capable of leaping across space-time and arriving in our world, you have to assume that their intelligence is limitlessly greater than ours, and therefore anything that they communicate to us could either be very true or very, very maliciously manipulated to control us.
Exactly.
Almost like a pet. In other words,
exactly.
we would be treated like an ant or a cockroach or like my pet dogs. They would have no way of even understanding what we're talking about, so it would be almost sport.
Yes.
Right?
Except that, if they're that intelligent, they also realize that we're grand spiritual beings in our own right, and therefore they're actually dealing with something that's much more massive than just our three-dimensional self.
Exactly, exactly. Here's the point, though. You've got two perspectives out there. You've got one group, we'll call them just for the sake of, like David Icke, who was speaking at the UFO conference up in San Francisco. He calls them the reptilians, okay? Or you might call them the serpents, like it talks about in the Bible, okay? And in fact, you got to understand that you're looking, when you look at the Bible, at things that are a description to people that were shepherds and artisans 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, right? Or you look at other ancient books, and what they're really trying to describe to you is something that's actually quite similar to what's happening today. So let's say we have one group that says, we are a predatory super nation of super scientists that don't have any spirit, but we invade and take over worlds. We can invade the mind space dimension. We can attack on the physical level. We can put policies in place to cut off their connection between their physical body and their spiritual body. Through the things like fluoridation and genetically modified food, electromagnetic pollution.
So are you suggesting that this is the reptilians that are involved with the current Illuminati?
Well,
have this type of agenda?
Of course, but it's, it's just it's no different than what the Bible's been saying all along. The serpentine.
Right. It's just that I want to sort of base it here in the here and now a little bit,
right?
So that people will understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, a lot of times though they misjudge it because, for example, when David's done a lot of really good work, but one of the times if you don't know what you're seeing because you've never seen anything like it before, what he did is he took a thing called ayahuasca, which is an analog of dimethyltryptamine. Yes. And ayahuasca and dimethyltryptamine opens up what's called the spirit eye. People call it the eye, the third eye, the astral eye, whatever. But basically it is we all are born as children with this ability to see in the spirit realm. That's why you see children see their little friends and see other things and see good and bad. And they have a thing called pavor nocturus, or night terrors, because they can see in the spirit realm things that aren't pleasant. They're very nasty, right? And they're not just making it up in their little minds because they've got hormone surges. They're actually having a problem. So the reason why I seem to be a little circuitous here is that people misinterpret the signals. For example, when after David went and took ayahuasca down in South America and he got in this altered state, he started seeing what he misinterpreted as shape-shifting. Shape-shifting doesn't occur.
Well, he hadn't seen it so much himself as he was taking the reports from Arizona Wilder
and others,
and others, and taking those at literal face value. That's my understanding. Now, and I have no criticism of him whatsoever.
No, not criticizing him.
I'm very interested in your take on this.
Well, okay, here's the important part of it. It's not to criticize him, because I think what he's doing is he's seeing in the spirit realm what's always there.
Right.
And when there's an intensity of that reality, it breaks through for people even that don't have any, regular sensitivity. So, for example, I've talked to people who have been in the presence of Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Right.
And Hillary Clinton has a presence of a demonic entity, if you want to call it transdimensional reptilian entity, that's so powerful, it's one of the most negative feelings I've ever had. Okay?
And you've been in her physical presence yourself?
Oh, yeah. I was one of the doctors that took care of the Englewood Fire Department and the first kid shot in Columbine, Mark Taylor. And we spent about, probably an hour or so at the Dakota Ridge High School. And because I do see into the spiritual realm, okay, and that happens many times after people have had a near-death experience. I died at birth and again at 8.5. And because of that, there's a mass release of DMT, and when that happens, it changes your brain structure and the very nature of how you perceive things. If it happens when you're really young, it does it at a time when you can understand and interpret things. If it happens when you're older, you can misinterpret things.
Interesting. Yep, gotcha.
Did you follow me?
Yes, I did.
Which is the reason why when you go to any religious group, you'll find that it's always children that are exposed to things like this so that they can understand them better. Otherwise, they can be freaked out if all of a sudden you start seeing things that you say, well, look, I've lost my mind. I'm not rational anymore.
Okay, but you're saying that in terms of Hillary, you're actually describing what you consider to be a demonic entity as opposed to a reptilian. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, it's a reptilian, all right. And you see it, you're not seeing a 5 foot,
so
whatever female, you're seeing a giant, reptilian entity that's in a different dimension.
Exactly. But because it's a reptilian entity doesn't necessarily make it demonic.
Well, let's put it this way.
It's still an ET from a different dimension.
Oh, this was evil. This is evil. This is evil. What people need to understand is that there's a vast universe out there. If you just listen to a lot of the scientists, and everybody that's probably listening to this will understand, if you just, they're looking for bacteria on Mars, and they're looking for other evidence that there's even simple life form on Titan and other planets, and planetoids and so on. The fact is, if you just take the minimal number of factors, there's 100 billion stars just in this galaxy, and there's 100 billion galaxies. And that's in the so-called known cosmos, which in a sense is probably an elemental particle in a yet larger universe.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
But
sure.
I'm still back with where you were saying that David Icke was wrong because
I think
reptilians, and you're saying they don't shapeshift.
Things have to also match science too, because if you had a shapeshift from a smaller individual to a physical presence that is, a giant reptilian or whatever, you're going to actually have the thermodynamic laws will cause spontaneous combustion. It just wouldn't occur. So what you have to do is, unless there are changes in the laws of physics, which isn't going to occur, then what you're seeing is something that's completely, doesn't occur. What's happening?
What you can see, though, is your perception is changing, and you're able to see into different dimensions simultaneously.
Yeah, that's an ability.
So they aren't changing. Your vision is changing. Your ability to see is changing when you're looking at them.
Yeah. Now, a lot of time people have to use these kind of things, and now the biggest problem I am worried about is that when there's a lack of discernment, there gets to be a mixed message, and so many messages have a lot of noise in them that people won't get a clear understanding of either the opportunities or the dangers of what's going on.
Sure.
And so you'll have people, for example, like Arizona Wilder and others, that say they've seen these things happen right in the middle of ceremonies, whatever. And what they don't understand is the intensity is so great, they're actually seeing into the spirit realm that's happening in a parallel universe.
Yes, it's a perception that's being altered. It's not the physical reality.
It's not physical reality, yeah.
Exactly. We're tapping into that, but at the same time, let's talk about how does that impact the Illuminati agenda, because we've got a lot of reptilians influencing that agenda.
Well, let me explain what happens. Is if you look at all of the secret societies down through history, not just in our current history in the last 6,000 years, but basically pretty well all of human history, going back to previous civilizations that have risen and fallen, there's been this, if you want to call it, Dark Alliance. Okay? Now, the Dark Alliance has been basically with higher orders of these secret orders that have passed down through. In the most recent past, going back the last 6,000 years, it was the ancient Sumerians and Egyptians. All the highest rulers of those civilizations would put their children through sex magic rituals, human sacrifice, and other things, so they would create if you want to call it, an astral gate in their mind, so they could attach these transdimensional entities to them, almost like the suckerfish on the shark. Okay.
Yes.
And that you could not advance within any of these higher orders unless you went through these ceremonies. So
Savali talks about this actually, and so does Leo Zagami.
Right. So what happens is, for example, if you're going to get to higher orders within the Illuminati, you actually have to go through these rituals in order for you, and the greatest power is for your ancestors to actually, quote, curse you, to be attached by these things, to gain more physical, psychic, emotional, and intellectual powers, so then therefore you can become a, quote, human, which in Welsh is serpent man.
Okay.
And if you look at the Magna Carta, it was written not for the mansters, which was the word monster, it was converted to monster. It was for serpent men, or the royals. Those who had gone through the ceremonies were humans, which means serpent men, and had the transdimensionals literally attached to them, almost like a parasite, a psychic parasite, to create a, quote, human, which is a new, if you want to call it, hybrid, clay and iron. In other words, you have the iron of the serpentine transdimensional beings with their higher science and abilities and so on, literally attached to the man to create a human.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
basically,
So-
you've got Illuminati with this proclivity, whatever you want to call it, and then what happens? Because that's where we are now with society. These people have been leading the way, if you want to call it leading, down a dark corridor, so to speak.
Well, they consider themselves, you see, one of the problems is a matter of perception. If you feel in your own twisted way that you're deciding what is right or wrong, and you feel you have the right to decide, and you're the keeper of civilization. For example, if you look at the tunic on the Teutonic Knights, right, you'll see these strange swinging arms in the form of a cross. That's not a Christian cross. That cross goes long before Jesus Christ, long before there was the first Jew, long before Egypt and Samaria. It goes way back to Atlantis and before.
Okay, you're talking
That
about
cross,
swastika as well, right?
the swastika is a little different symbol, but that cross actually is a symbol called as above, below. Okay? And what you're doing is you're looking at the swinging arms of a galaxy above and below at the equinoxes. So that's what you're seeing there.
Okay.
Okay?
So here we are at this juncture where
We're now-
actually moving into the galactic center.
Right, so we're moving not only through the plane, but at what an equinox. So we're having passing through the plane at an equinox has very important effects, not just on the physical plane, because we're entering an energy belt, which affects the DNA, it affects life form and communications and everything, but it also affects the spiritual aspects of the creatures on the planet.
Yeah.
But it also opens up gates.
Bring this back now to
Right.
the problems of discernment, to the wildcard factors that have got to do with the eternal magical creatures that we are and how this can't be modeled in a supercomputer, and then again with what they do think they are trying, or what you do think that they are trying to do with us over the next few weeks and months. And,
Well,
and there's a way to align this information in a way that's practically meaningful to people there.
Right,
Who actually, as we speak, are thinking, what do I do with my jobs, my family, my money,
Yeah, I wanna get
my
to that too.
location? There are practical problems to solve here.
Yeah, the first thing I think, number one, is they have to discern, number one, am I involved with a religion, real lies going on, or am I involved with spirituality?
Right.
And I'm not necessarily going to put a label on it or tell them which one. What I try to tell them is that, for example, I'm a believer, but if I go to a church, I'm going to cause trouble. Because I know things that they can't know, won't know. They're going to show that a lot of things that they're teaching are patently lies. Okay?
Of course.
And unfortunately, it isn't just one group or another. I'm closest to lie to, if you want to call it, I'm like a cosmic messianic believer. And I don't even like to use the word Christian because it was actually a blasphemy against Christians, that they're little anointed ones.
That's right, that term's already been hijacked long ago.
Right, it's hijacked.
Yeah.
Now, here's the point, is that if you actually understand the split in the so-called Eastern and Western Church, you understand the reason why there's such a determination to not only hijack Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and why this is all kind of leading us toward what I call this final conflict of Armageddon. It's been stage managed at a higher level.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It's all stage managed.
Yeah.
And the problem is people don't understand they're being manipulated, even though every step is being manipulated. Oh yeah, we got to get Al-Qaeda. Well, who created Al-Qaeda? When you start showing that these things were totally manufactured, and Al-Qaeda means the database.
Yes.
Or you show evidence that the World Trade Center towers were demolished with advanced explosives, including micronukes and thermite. Or you start to demonstrate the financial line, like John Boncour, who's a Mohawk, who was actually speaks prophetically. He was on the show last week. The way I wanted people to do is first off, don't accept something unless it's intellectually correct, at whatever level they're at, unless they go back quietly and pray and try to hear the voice of the Creator God. Because the problem right now is that there's so much noise, it's determined to keep them in, quote, Babylon or confusion, so they won't be able to discern, or they'll just dismiss it and they'll say, look, you people that talk about UFOs are nuts. Okay? If somebody had told me this years ago, I'd say, you're crazy. There's no way, going through medical school, training, surgery, whatever, I'd say there's no way that could be true. Because my mind is now focused on, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to help people, I'm going to do this and that, and I'm getting access to the totality of human knowledge and science, and I'm going to be able to, some future date, we're going to be able to help cure people of disease and so on. Not knowing that only 4% of information is access to even the university PhD tenured professorial level at the top levels in the world, and the other 96% is by invitation only.
Right.
Right? Or that society, and when you've been invited to enter those realms, then you start to realize, like, my gosh, your whole world is shattered, right? And that's what's disturbing about this, and I'm trying to get the message to the people that the hardest is to argue with people. Like, I remember having an argument here a year and a half ago with Professor Stephen Jones, who felt that thermate could have brought down the World Trade Centers alone. And of course, because I had a background in quantum physics and nuclear physics, I was supposed to go to MIT, and I went into honors biochemistry. I asked him a series of questions that he couldn't answer on a scientific ground. But he wanted to cling to his a priori idea anyway. Even though there is probably evidence it was thermate, there had to be nuclear explosions. There could not have been directed energy weapons, and I tried to explain to him, because I was a doctor for U.S. Space Command and Strategic Defense Star Wars. I said, and I talk to the engineers at very high levels and know exactly what's capable and what we have.
Okay, but you have a really interesting background, okay?
Right.
But a lot of people say, well, you're working for them.
Yeah, I know they'll say that, but that's what people need to do is they need to do intellectual analysis, and they need to pray. They need to trust their gut, in other words, their spiritual gut.
So how did you get out of it? Because in a sense, you did work for them, right? You were their doctor.
Well, I was a doctor, but I didn't know it. What happened is, here's what happened. People are so compartmentalized. Initially, I'll give you an example. Initially, I talked to someone working at, say, Falcon, and they had a little badge that would allow them to go into one hallway and down one pathway into one room with a security card. And they'd face scan them with a retinal scan and then fingerprint scan them. And boom, they'd go in their room and they'd spend so many hours there and they'd walk down the same pathway. And they were monitored.
And they have to follow lines, isn't that right?
They have to follow certain lines on the floor. And if they don't, they're immediately apprehended. And it's not pleasant. Okay? So they're very highly compartmentalized. So you can talk to your doctor. Now, these guys really love being able to talk to me, because what I would do is I would talk to all the different people, and because I have this advanced technical training, which they never assumed I did, like on artificial intelligence, supercomputers, electronics, quantum physics, and other things, I talked to them about their project, and after a while they were more interested in hearing what I had to tell them about what everybody else was doing and projects that they didn't know anything about. So as time went on, I gained more and more knowledge.
Yeah. And because of your training, you knew what questions to ask and knew how to listen. And you knew what they would really
and they wanted to talk, because they couldn't tell their wives. They weren't allowed to tell anybody, their son, their wife, their children, anybody. Or their next door neighbor.
So you get this aggregate of information.
Right, and so what happens
is on top of it, you've had these life-death experiences.
Right, and some what I would call supernatural and some other types of experiences that all fit together. So
you're putting all of this together, and then you eventually create this radio show, right? And you're interviewing witnesses and so on. Mm-hmm. But where are you at now? If we take this whole package, and you've got something to say here because you called us, and I believe you have some very interesting. You were told to call us.
I was told to call.
Wonderful. By your direct contact.
Yeah, I have. If you want to call, I have the direct phone line.
You're not the only one that's been told that way to call us.
Yeah, I was told to call you, and I said it's time to call you. Not an hour from now, but right now, and I did. Okay. So that's interesting, and things always happen like that to me. Sure. If I told you all the stories, you could fill books. You'd have stacks of tapes of amazing stories. You say that can't happen, but it has. Okay.
Right.
So
I want to bring it back to what are they modeling?
Yeah.
And what about these guys with their children and their money? Okay, fine.
Well, yeah, and I'm going to get to that. So basically, I want people to discern and use discernment, and I.
Therefore, why do you think you were told to call us?
At the moment, I had no idea. Okay.
Do you have an idea now?
Yeah. I have a very clear idea.
Okay. Yeah. And do you want to sort of tell us, or do you want to go down that road?
Yes, well, yeah. What people have to understand is that human beings are a supernatural, transdimensional being that is made in the image of the Creator of the universe.
Yes.
Just like the Bible says.
Absolutely.
Okay? But not only that, we're like cells in a body, and we're connected, almost like neurons, so that if we get to a level of revelation, it's not just for our own purpose, greedily, it's to serve the entire body of mankind. And the best way to think of mankind is not just, in this plane of time-space, but mankind is a non-local being that stretches across the cosmos and into the past, present, and future. Okay? So when you start to grasp that, and you have that intuitive, that's why I tell people when I try to do talks, I say, there's two groups of quote religions on earth. There's those that believe in the reincarnation, and those that don't believe in reincarnation, right? And the reason is they're both right and wrong.
Okay.
And the reason is, for them, that's their level of understanding, because that's where they're at. When you become truly intuitive at the highest levels, there's no such thing as reincarnation.
Sure.
Okay?
Because we're eternal beings.
Right.
Yeah.
And once you start grasping that, it's like the words of Yeshua HaMashiach Jesus that says, though you do it to the least of my brother, you've done it to me. If you actually felt the pain of allowing your government to attack and blow up little girls in Baghdad, you wouldn't do it, because it would be like a neuron connected to another being. Or you wouldn't walk by a plant starving for water without watering it. You wouldn't spread depleted uranium on the crops because you could feel that. In other
You
words,
wouldn't do these things because you're doing it to yourself.
right. It's another expression of the I am. Okay.
Totally.
We're a gardener of the garden. We're actually, you think of each spinning galaxy as a spinning flower in the universe. Okay?
And, But let's get back to this, because we've got reptilians influencing the Illuminati agenda, and we've got an agenda that's being rolled out on a bunch of eternal beings that don't really recognize their eternalness. And so how's it going to play out? What's going on?
Well, first, the thing that I found
And
is...
why has this been allowed
well,
to
it's
get
allowed
so
to get so
far?
far for a couple of reasons. The most important thing in the universe for sentient beings is to have free choice. In other words, to choose to remember. A lot of people think that you're going through life to learn things, or to prove a point, or to reach so many, like a point system, like a grade, and then if you reach a certain grade, you can transcend, which is totally garbage. Mm-hmm. It's like my little daughter with Down syndrome. She doesn't have to earn points to be my daughter.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
You are a son or daughter of the Most High God. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is your birthright's being stolen away from you, just like the story of Jacob and Esau. It's being stolen away from people. And the problem is it's being stolen away primarily to tell them things that they are not. Or to fill in dogma, and first interesting, the word dogma means am God, backwards. They're being told that they should decide what is good or evil rather than deciding from the Spirit by making that connection. Because the only way for people to connect and not have an external matrix is to have the Spirit inside them.
Absolutely.
Now the problem I see is this, is that people have to discern there's two groups in the universe. There is, if you want to call it the dark empire. We will call them the trans-dimensional beings. We might call them the lords of darkness and their princes. And there's many different civilizations that are in this. Whether they're, we don't even need to get into names, but there's a whole series of them.
Yep.
You might call them the serpentines, the reptilians, the tall grays, whatever you want to call them. Okay. There's a whole array of these. And on the other side, there is a grand council of civilizations out there that are very, very caring, and they are connected to the Spirit of the Creator God. They are advanced beings, both human, humanoid, and non-human, across the cosmos and the universe.
And of course, this is why the movie Star Wars was such a tremendous modern myth, because it represented this whole archetype that everyone really understands, even if they don't know it.
Well, they understand it because it's something that they're resonating with their spirit. You see,
Exactly.
It's almost like someone going through a neuralizer, like the show MIB, Men in Black. And so they've forgotten something, but something can jar them back to remember it anyway.
Yeah.
Right? Okay?
Yep.
So in a sense, you're in a sense of what I call spirit sleep. Your spirit's asleep so that it can then start to reawaken its connectedness with everyone else.
Okay,
And
but
so
what's the nuts and bolts of how this plays out, though, at the moment?
Well, I'll just give you a story. This is one of the most recent ones. Roughly 1 year ago, and I get visions and dreams, okay? And one of my primary roles isn't to be a doctor or a whistleblower or a radio host. Those are all secondary. And really, to be honest with you, they're just a vehicle to try to get the real truth out, which isn't just facts. Because the problem is we have a sea of facts. But it doesn't change people. For example, when you look at the anomalies around 9/11, how many people have insisted that there's a proper investigation? Right?
Absolutely.
Right, and there's not. I mean, you've just followed the financial side and whatever, all the other anomalies, and we still have all these factions, even in the so-called 9/11 movement. Well, it's the same way with religion. I call it real lies going on. They have their dogma they cling to because it's what we call their hell insurance, because they're fearful of knowing these things out here, of hell or separation or whatever it is at the end of their physical life. So they kind of stuff themselves with dogma so that they can feel safe, right?
Okay, but you just told us you have 3 roles that are your
and
secondary roles. What's your first role?
My first role is to speak as a prophet.
Okay.
Okay, Now, I'm not talking about Monty Python, fill a stadium with prophets thing. And there's many different prophets. For example, I had, on the show last week, I had John Boncourt splitting the sky. And I really believe that there are many people, especially now, that there's a prophetic role for them.
Sure.
Okay? And they're from all different nations, colors, peoples, whatever, on the earth. It's like the body of mankind. But there's specific prophets that have what I call, if you want to call it, a executive role to try to bring those together and to bring the picture together so that there can be a platform to have an overall synthesis that can present it back to mankind and say, now see? So they can start to kind of get with the program before all hell breaks loose.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons why I do my show, and that's one of the reasons I believe I was told to call you. I come from the perspective I want people to get rid of, quote, religion and get in every moment into spirituality. In other words, don't go to church on Sunday and think you're safe all week or whatever other day you like.
Don't go in your prayer room and think that you're...
Okay, but as a prophet, I mean, this is all good, but that's like the ABCs, and we're like way beyond that with our audience.
I'm sure you are,
Give them some credit.
But I want them to understand where I'm coming from with my show, because a lot of time they
won't get this on the show because I only present certain portions of it. Now, here's the next step.
Okay.
The next step is 1 year ago, I was taken by the Grand Council to the Eschaton.
Okay.
The Eschaton is beyond time-space.
Sure.
Okay? Now, this may seem very bizarre to people. I've been there 3 times. This last time was 1 year ago.
Okay.
And it's not a hallucination. It was a courtroom, if you want to call it, beyond time-space, with 24 witnesses through human history.
Okay.
Okay? And we were brought before the council because they're making a decision, either thumbs up or thumbs down for our civilization.
Okay.
Okay? And we're at the knife's edge of a bad decision.
Okay.
Okay, and I believe you.
Right.
Mankind, as a corporate being, has to make decisions to get on the right timeline.
Absolutely.
And if they don't make the right decisions, we're going to get on the wrong one, and we're going to become a dead cinder. In a sense, this planet, and if you want to think of the Earth as a living being, it's like a giant womb of these spirit beings called human beings on Earth, or mankind, that are about to be birthed to become, I call, Homo luminous, or Homo galacticus, or Homo, an advanced mankind that can interact with advanced civilizations across the cosmos, that doesn't have to have a matrix of billions of laws, that doesn't have to have a chip in us to track us to make sure we're good, and do all these things. Because what we're at this nexus or crossroads where we either are going to have the law, as Jesus Christ said himself, which is one of the great teachers, Yeshua HaMashiach, which means the Father in the flesh. Okay? And we are the Father in the flesh. So are you. It's as we wake people up, they then manifest what's always been there.
It's the manifestation that counts. We're not greater than someone else.
Okay,
We're just...
so you're in front of this council, and you're
And what it is...
witnessing what?
The consciousness of all of these people down through human history.
Okay.
To the council and all these different beings in the courtroom, and they basically came up with a judgment. They said, "Now we are sending you back, and the time is very short before judgment is going to fall, and mankind as a corporate being must get this message. And if they don't get the message correctly, which transcends religion, politics, national borders, or their version of a new world order or world government, because they got a world government that's absolutely noxious. It's not. See, a world government can be a world government with national boundaries and nations. It can be with peoples that keep their recipe cards and control of their civilization. It can be with a world that has some degree of order without knocking all boundaries down and creating regional trade zones, because the world is not based on economy. It's based on, if you want to call it, identity. Okay, and what they're doing is they're homogenizing the identity so they can control the population and turn people into cybernetic robots, is what they want to do.
Absolutely.
And they're really literally moving us step by grade into a matrix. Now, the future that they're talking about is where people, citizens, can even have the option of having a brain interface chip and be loaded into a rack. And they won't even have to exist in the physical world. Their bodies would be put in life extension technology and loaded in a rack for centuries or thousands of years. That's where we're headed. People say, oh no, that won't happen. I said, well, I'm sorry, but that hellish world is right around the corner. But it's dependent on humankind. And whether we'll even get to that, or most of civilization will die, these people are feverishly building underground bases at the rate here in America, for example, of 2 bases per year, anywhere from $18 to $26 billion.
Yeah.
Anywhere from 5.24 to 7.25 cubic miles in size, most of them in dormant volcanic domes, or built with nuclear explosions underground to create these massive domes, or what's called a matrix, where they cut these giant tunnels.
But that's not going to save them.
No, it won't save them. And the fact is, it's not going to be a technical answer that's going to save them. And that's what the problem is.
Yes.
These are advanced intellectual beings without spirit. And that's the basis of what we call the reptilian or serpentine empire. It's like a group of super scientists with these super intellects with massive knowledge of energy and time space and jumping across the galaxy and life extension and everything, but with no spirit, because they do what is right in their own eyes. Way of doing it, or a little humor or some music, and eventually they get to the point where they're able to then accept the intellectual truths, the spiritual truths, and so on. The two key things that I try to teach in my show are the first thing is that people don't know what they are. People really don't know what kind of a being they are, and because of that, which is in many cases kept purposely away from them, they're manipulated. For example, if you didn't know you were a bird, you'd obviously not try to fly.
Yep.
Right?
Good analogy.
The other thing is I try to teach them is that everything that they have learned in the past has been pre-digested and presented to them, so they really don't understand the nature of the universe they live in.
Yeah.
They don't even know what, quote, reality is. And
all this is one of the parameters in the model, presumably, that people are interacting with this stage show,
right,
with a very limited amount of information at their disposal with which to react and make appropriate judgments.
Right. So what I try to do is I try to stretch them beyond that. And one of the things that I try to do is there's no such thing as a sacred cow. Whether it's a political view, a religious view, a scientific view, it has to be, trust but verify. Ronald Reagan before...
Record as much of the remaining 90% as possible. And in particular, many of the people viewing this video now, and the two of us, Kerry and myself in particular, are really interested and focused on what is going to be happening in the immediate few weeks and months. And I think one of the phrases that Bill used was the calm before the storm. What's the storm?
Well, there's the best way to think is the Army War College, and if talk to people that work in the Marine Army War College and other places, what they do is they war game it out. They have people that sit around big boardroom tables, and then what they do is they put it into simulation computers. They use Simula, PL1, and other languages that were actually developed for the military, and then they put it on their own supercomputers, and then they run through a number of simulations. So every war, every conflict, every national emergency has already been scenarioed out. People don't realize just how much computing power has been put into these things, for everything from ET invasions to a tsunami hitting the west coast, to the Cumbre Viejo, to a civil disruption because of an earthquake in the New Madrid Fault in the Midwest. So basically everything's been simulated. He had too many aspartame jelly beans. So the idea is that eventually you'll get enough evidence and enough logical things that you have what I call the two witnesses. It has to not assault your intellect, the information, and it also has to ring with your spirit.
Good. But a lot of people watching this now have already done that homework.
Right.
Either by listening to your shows or listening to ours, because we've been operating in exactly the same way, or both.
Right.
And there's also, would you agree that there's not a lot of time now?
No, there's not a lot of time. And there's a number of what I call spasms of events that are going to happen. And to just give you the timeline of where things are going, rather than giving you specific dates. The first thing is that people need to understand whether we elect McCain-Palin or Obama, Biden, or the Green Party with McKinney, the events are already in motion to create a regional and world economic catastrophe, and then to create regional and world banks.
So they've already got the script for the movie, but they haven't got the cast yet.
Right, and they've gone to central casting, and whoever the players are, they're in a sense going to be like riders on the wave of this.
So what's the script?
Well, the script basically is...
You know what? I just have to say I'm really, really delighted to have met you personally.
Yeah, well, it's great to...
Thank you, sir. This is Project Camelot, and my name is Bill Ryan, with my partner, Kerry Cassidy. And we're bookending here right between us. We've got Dr. Bill Deagle, and it's a tremendous privilege to be with you.
Thanks very much.
I just joked with Dr. Bill just now that I'm claiming a Guinness record for having listened to the Granada Forum lecture all the way through 7 times, which I had to do because there's so much data in there. And not only that, in a phone call just a few days ago, Dr. Bill told us that he'd probably only presented about 10% of the information which he has to offer. And one of the things which we hope to do in the next couple of hours is to see whether we can get on.
There's a number of items. Now, what I often try to do on my radio show, which is the NutriMedical Report, is on Genesis Network. And the 2 websites, if you want to check it out, is Nutri, N-U-T-R-I, medical.com, where I have a lot of the anti-aging, life extension, civil defense, and other information. And the other website is Clay and Iron, CLAYANDIRON.com. The network is Genesis Networks out of St. Paul, Minnesota. And their website for getting podcast, streaming, and on-demand, which replays the shows, is GCN, George Charlie Nancy Live.com. What I try to do on my show is I realize that one of the things about having a regular radio show is you can bring in all these experts and guests, but there's several ways of approaching it. My approach has been to try that if they listen to enough shows, that people will start to see a montage of images that will change their paradigm. Mm-hmm. Because you can't change people by necessarily beating them over the head with the facts if they emotionally aren't ready for that. Yeah. And you also have to change their paradigm by what I call by the little grades that happen as they listen to more and more people, and they are willing to accept one message from one type of person or one